Okay, thank you, Ingrid, and thanks to the panelists of that last session. That was really um, inspiring and thought-provoking. So thank you all, and thank you all for your work. So in this panel, I'm Stephen McCauley. I'm going to chair this panel. I'm a faculty member in the Department of Integrative and Global Studies in the Global School at WPI, and I also co-direct the Melbourne Project Center. We have an opportunity in this panel to address one of the main challenges, if not the main challenge we've been hearing about from numerous speakers today, which is climate change in the Oceania region. And we're lucky to have a number of really amazing guests with us today who are partners with us at the Melbourne Project Center and at the Wellington Project Center. That's Ross Jackson from the Wellington, Peter Young from Melbourne, and April Seymour from Melbourne. So why don't we, if I could ask the panelists to turn their cameras on and unmute themselves, and I think we can go into our gallery view for a conversation. Hi, April, good to see you, and Peter and Ross, nice to meet you for the first time. So I think I'll just start by going around. We have a little smaller group, so I'd like to ask each of you to speak to several different questions. I think we'll start by just keeping it a bit local and asking you to share some things about the work you're doing to address climate change and climate resilience. And then we'll maybe broaden out to think a little bit about Oceania and what this means to think about these issues at that scale. And also, if we can talk a little bit about our work with WPI students and where that might be heading. Maybe we'll start off with just if you could introduce yourselves and tell a little bit about the organization that you work with. Ross, do you want to start this one off?
Sure, kia ora. I just need to mention I seem to be in a bad room here. I've got an internet connection that's a bit unstable, so if you lose me or I miss some things and have to ask questions, my apologies. But I work with the Greater Wellington Regional Council. I'm an old codger who's sort of retired several years ago, but I still work part-time with our flood protection group, mainly these days with environmental restoration to do with community groups, with our flood protection team. And along with that, there's a whole recreation component that comes in, and hopefully there's a greater awareness of the climate and the issues that face us just by getting people involved. The regional council, it's sort of I feel like it's an overreaching body that's responsible for environmental management within the region. Developing policies, but the core functions are sort of like biosecurity, emergency management, flood protection, harbours, land management, parks and forests, pollution control, transport and water supply. There's quite a range of things, and there's some conflicting issues in there, but the council itself has a very strong, I believe now, climate change policy. And nationally, we have a climate change commission, which is a non-partisan body, and they recently came out with their report just in the past week, and with lots of far-reaching recommendations. So I'm quite heartened by this. I think there's going to be a lot of changes will take place. There'll be a lot of vigorous debate about it all. But essentially for the last 30 years, we keep signing up to accords, and we never sort of make the progress we should make. And really, we've been standing still for the last 20 years, if we want to be brutally honest. And we are, even though we're a small country, the people who perhaps have a different view would say that what difference does it make in New Zealand, the small amount? As a population, we're one of the highest emitters in the world. So we do have a big responsibility. And I'm very confident the current government, which has a majority, we'll introduce some hard policies in the next 2 years.
Thank you, Ross, for that, realistic view. April?
Hi, everyone. My name is April Seymour from the Port Phillip Eco Centre in Melbourne, Australia, right near Port Phillip Bay, which is the big blue backyard of Melbourne, a city of 5 million people. I'd like to acknowledge the Yalukit Willam clan of the Boonwurrung language group, the traditional and continuing custodians of the land and waters where the Eco Centre does a lot of our work. We acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded, and a lot of what we do at the Eco Centre is striving to uphold the connection to land and protecting the land and waterways. So we're a community environmental hub, and we do our own programs, education, research, citizen science, practical activities. So that might be ranging from energy audits at businesses or schools to revegetation on or monitoring of living breakwaters or new and emerging projects, capital projects that are happening on our coastlines and within our catchments. So we talk in a lot of different languages to a lot of different people about issues and topics. We pull it all together through a theory of change that is summarized by Connect, Act, Transform. So first we want to connect people to place and each other as a community. So we do a lot of place-based explanations, action, and advocacy, while also recognizing that that's part of that patch is part of a bigger picture. We also then activate. So we get people to activate new behaviors as individuals or as groups. So sustainable, regenerative, and climate positive behaviors. And when we have sufficient momentum there, we want to really transform what's normal, whether it's legislation or business best practice or how we live our everyday lives, curriculum in schools. So we've got a lot of things going on, and that's possible because as a hub, we do direct delivery. We partner with a lot of groups, including WPI interns. And we also have a network of around 150 schools and another 100 partners that we collaborate on to try and reach across sectors and across issues that are interconnected, put a little bit of order and action behind them. So in a bit, I'll talk about the upcoming project on climate that we're going to do with WPI, where we hope to make some of our work either more explicit that it is having a positive impact on climate change, or have a more transparent and frank discussion where it's a great program, but might not be making the impact we need in this critical decade, really.
Thanks, April. Peter.
Hi, Peter Young. I'm the Director of Snowy River Innovation, and out of Snowy River Innovation, I better explain Snowy River Innovation first. Out of a number of years of climate change activism and sustainability awareness, particularly framed around my professional background in the property development industry, but originally trained as an architect, a project manager, and then got on it very quickly into the hard commercial reality of how to link all of the environmental and commercial aspects together. And certainly in the context of best practice in ecological awareness with whatever we're doing. So some of the founding activities of us are really strongly committed to, and indeed some of us have been founding members of the Sustainable Living Foundation in Melbourne, which has now gone national. It usually has a 1-week festival in Melbourne, for example, if you're talking about community engagement, and we would have over 120,000 direct participants in the occupying part of the heart of Melbourne, Federation Square. But regionally, I've had a lot of engagement. I'm a country boy way back, so I've got a good sense of what it is to get your hands dirty, how to grow things, how to strip cows, and indeed to neuter beasts when they need to be neutered. So quite a grip on the earth, and I've done a lot of sailing as well, so I'm very familiar with water and its ways, and a fair bit of that has been offshore. racing. So the Snowy River Innovation, its main role is to commercialise clean technologies. And we've been relatively successful recently with a company called Capricorn Power. And to give an example of that, we've been able to take a unique heat to power engine flow chart initially out of the head of an ex-CSIRO thermodynamicist and get it up to the stage of now being a commercial product and growing the valuation of that activity by the day. And why focused on shifting from hard climate activism, marching in the streets 15 years ago, having read Climate Code Red and a number of other things, and having undertaken sustainability training at Swinburne University and applying that to best practice, first of all in building, I could see that there was a real yawning gap in getting, supporting great ideas and getting them to address some of the key issues around climate change and sustainability. And critically, in that period, I was a director of a group, one of a board member, I shouldn't say the director, a director of a group, Gippsland Climate Change Network for a period of 8 years. And now Snowy River Innovation has coupled up quite often with Gippsland Climate Change Network to deliver regionally framed programs. And 2 years we're involved with biochar. We're now going on a new pathway in bushfire hazard reduction. That's not with WPI at the moment, that's with Melbourne University, a group of postgraduates there, training program about bushfire hazard reduction. And so certainly I'm very keen to circle back to some of the areas of concern that Maria's working with, for example. And but critically, we've seen the absolute benefit of partnering up, and indeed an older person's professional responsibility to transfer some of our awarenesses and knowledge back into the education sphere. So yeah, I'll cut it short. That's enough. And I'm inclined to ramble, so away we go.
Great. Thanks, Peter. Thank you. April, you had mentioned the project that's coming up where you're going to be working with the WPI team to address some climate planning issues. Maybe this is a good chance to hear about any particular, initiatives that are on your agenda addressing climate change. Do you want to start with that, April?
Sure, thanks, Stephen. Well, there's often a long list of options, and there's also, I think, whether you're in a community sector or private sector or public sector, a hesitation to kill your darlings. There can be something that's really fun and enjoyable and gives benefits to community well-being, for example, which is very valid, but might not be making the dent that it needs to in terms of emissions reduction. Or changing those at a fast enough pace. So we work with people that might be individual change, we might be collective change, we might be system-wide change in our different partnerships. So something like the SDG goals is a good shorthand for people to be able to understand sort of what you're talking about or working on between countries or between sectors, but it's really hard to understand, is anyone really making a motion with that when a local government or a state government or an industry makes these innovations or brings things in. There's not a reporting. So I think even, remember 20 years ago, even at Macca's or McDonald's, they started having to put calories on the menu and be more honest about what the impact is of a product. In Australia, we also have a star rating system on appliances. So you can see what will the energy consumption and the water consumption be for something per year. We don't really have that for our programs. So one of the things that we'd like to do in this coming strategic plan cycle with the WPIs is look at almost like a report card or a score, so that for each of our programs, our activities that we do, we say, is there an emissions reduction attributable to this activity, either directly or as a probable flow-on effect. We do a lot of work with kids, and we know that there's important changes we're doing there, but if that change might be 15 years down the path, when they're purchasing things or running their own company, that's beyond this critical decade. So we hope that we're not sure of a measurement like this. We know that it'll be uncomfortable as well, because we might have things that we know are great at biodiversity or great at health and well-being, or other measures that are of value to us, but that might not be making a dent on emissions reduction. So I'd be interested in sharing. We'll be happy to share and test it and be doing frank conversations ourselves. For example, if we help a school retrofit all of its energy thermal efficiency and swap to sustainable energy, we know pretty directly that there's going to be an emissions reduction. But in our municipality, I'm not sure where it is for Ross, how it is for Ross, for example, but the big wedge, 87% of emissions in our municipality actually is attributed to community. So we need to understand: are we engaging them? Are we helping them draw down as well?
Yeah, thanks, April. Those trade-offs are difficult. So thanks. Yeah, Ross, do you want to pick up on that and tell us about how it's going there in Wellington?
Yeah, I guess I'm no real expert, but just following pretty closely. But the bigger myth in New Zealand, and I'm speaking really New Zealand in general here, are still farming and vehicles. And farming, there's been a whole lot of criteria set down that really has to be implemented, and that could well affect the income for some people. So that, of course, creates a significant issue. We have this sort of image in New Zealand of being a clean green, because we get a fairly good rainfall overall. It does tend to look pretty green, but that's a bit of a overlying veneer at times. Our rivers, sort of 60% of our rivers are non-swimmable, and 2 decades ago that would be completely unheard of. And this has mainly come about by the farming practices, and so there's big movements to try and rectify that. But it's a major issue. Trying to get to the source of the problem when you get pollution into your groundwaters that it seeps for miles, and there's a lot of resistance amongst certain communities, understandably, to accept this. I think we have a climate emergency declared by our council, and I think in the future that the young people is what I really hold out hope for, that they seem to be the ones leading the charge. It's sort of more my generation that still hold a resistance. We've always done it this way, and not prepared to make the change, or perhaps verbally talk about it, but then they'll still want to drive their 5-litre vehicle or whatever. So those sort of changes.
We have a disconnect there.
Have a brief disconnect, yeah. Hopefully Ross will be able to join us back.
They'll come, and the legislation will perhaps fall.
Okay, thanks, Ross. Thanks. Peter, I wanted to pick up on a thread with you because you're in working with industry, which is a little unlike a lot of our partners we work with from groups or government. I wonder if you could share from that perspective your approach to, I know you're dedicated to this notion of drawdown and climate resilience and to fostering a circular economy. Can you tell us a bit about how you, and as a person in the private sector, really help advance that vision of a circular economy?
Yeah, well, we're walking the talk. We're doing it, and we are very framed in whatever we do now on the drawdown program, which is a fantastic framework for carbon emissions drawdown to be driven commercially over the next 20 or 30 years. And the drawdown context was developed by a man I've got a lot of profound respect for, Paul Hawken from the US. And Paul's got together a group of about 400, 450 researchers right around the world. And they've done quite a lot of hard number research, economic evaluation, social, environmental evaluation, and all from a carbon drawdown perspective. And they've identified 80 key opportunities, which means that we would really be well ahead of the carbon emissions curve, aiming to keep it less than 1.5% by 2050. And even indeed, what I'm reading at the moment is quite spooky. Unless we have dramatic shift, and we can't wait for decades, we won't be getting anywhere near being able to draw down to 1.5. And after about 10 years of thinking about it, reading argument after argument on unravelling trends, carbon emission wise and their impacts, let alone the massive problem that we've got with environmental wreckage going on at many, many levels internationally. Population's growth's got a lot to do with it. Not sure of the solution. Human nature intervenes there for a lot of people. So coupling that into behavioural change, education rapidly about what the drawdown opportunities, I think, is a great way forward. But how you get that coupled into policy regulation, and particularly where you have reactionary governments in place who are there effectively defending vested interests of a pretty significant nature, you've got to do a lot of hard thinking, hard action. So we go out and preach energy efficiency. We preach renewable energy and we deliver it. That's part of what we do daily. Yeah.
Great.
And yeah, sorry, I
No, that's great.
get a bit carried away here.
No, that's great. Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I respond to that, Stephen?
Yeah, please.
Thanks, Peter. I think it's fantastic what you're doing, and it speaks a little bit to where Ra earlier said, not concentrating on the science of the what, but the science of the why, and beginning to make that change. So I really think it's fantastic that the message is being put in a very practical way to people who, as part of their business, can invest and see a return in such a practical way. That's my commendations. And I think something that Ross said and what you're speaking to in terms of the politics are, in Australia, we have great laws too. In Victoria, our state, there is a new Environmental Protection Act that comes into effect in July. It has a bit of a flip, a general environmental duty, which puts the onus on you to do no harm, as that's your responsibility, as opposed to someone having to prove that you are doing harm. And there's a bit of a panic, not just in the industries and people who will be held accountable to a general environmental duty, but to the enforcement agencies of, well, what does that really look like? It's not very clear in the law. And so we see across law, whether it's a state or a national legislation, something, as I think Ross said, signing on to maybe an international agreement, or if it's a local planning policy here, a big gap in resourcing of the enforcement and the volunteerization of having to do something like we're doing, where we're doing citizen science to gather evidence to try and prove a point or hold a polluter accountable or highlight an issue or an opportunity. So we certainly are wrestling with that in Australia, I know, in terms of when you have great things, even when you do have something pretty good on paper, how do you make it a reality, measure it, and resource it?
And I think that community engagement, community awareness, education's an absolute framework, and thank goodness for the Port Phillip Eco Centre. I'm 750 metres just north of Fitzroy Street, April, so you're a neighbour. I know the centre quite well.
Yes, I know we'll have to have a cuppa after
Yeah,
this.
no, indeed. I got a thought for the end of the year. I'll share it with you later.
We just have a
With
little over 5
WPI, actually. Yeah.
Let's do that. We just have a little over 5 minutes left in this very short panel, unfortunately, but I want to just scale out a little bit and think about Oceania for a moment. Could you speak to any, I mean, are you involved in any alliances or initiatives that reach beyond your home location into across Oceania? And what is the importance of those alliances, or how might we better leverage alliances across this region?
Yeah.
Ross, do you want to speak to anything?
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure. There is a lot of concern expressed here because we have such a large Polynesian community, larger than some of the islands in Polynesia themselves, and so there's a lot of discussion goes on. But I'm not sure, to be quite honest, just what we're doing to assist them, focusing on our own little area. But look, if I can just, before I leave this one, just say that I've had numerous WPI student groups over the last 5-6 years, and the projects I've always been working on has been water and flooding, climate change, if you like, and predominantly in one area. And one of the big values I always sort of found is having these kids, young students, fresh-faced, they've been outstanding, all of them. And just having them out there asking questions, getting discussions going, they made far more inroads than I could ever do going out there trying to talk. And, it was a great value. Besides the high quality report they turned out, it's just their engagement with the community and that wider community about some of these issues and just raising that awareness. Sorry, I just need to throw that in.
Thanks, Ralph. I'm really glad you mentioned that, because I would love to hear more about that topic too. So I'm glad you mentioned that. Either Peter or April, do you want to speak to either, what we can do?
Just quickly, through aligned with the current work that with the WPI research cohort that we're working with at the moment on the commercial opportunities surrounding macroalgae, microalgae, things that grow in the water effectively. And the connection there only recently through a group known as the Climate Foundation. And indeed, one of the founding directors of that, Dr. Brian von Herzen, has written one of the chapters in the drawdown compiling of marine permaculture. That's got massive potential outreach into into Oceania. And indeed, part of the research reaches from the Philippines at the moment. A lot of work on the restoration, regeneration of the Great Barrier Reef, some fascinating work there, down to the Great Southern Kelp Forests south of Hobart, and all of the great sailing and fishing grounds off there. And another group called Ocean Foresters, based out of all places, Colorado. I couldn't think of a more a less appropriate centre of a continent land-based location than Colorado, so stunning as it is. So that's just one of a number of regeneration opportunities which have got a commercial focus, because I get sick to death of applying for government grants, and believe me, we're good at it. We had to be, so we got sick of the handout mentality, feeding off the great udder of government, state, federal, etc. Very messy, very complicated. Go out, grab some dough out of the investing marketplace, but for heaven's sake, really be ethical in the process. Really critical. Yeah. Sorry about that, Ross. Would you like to add to that?
April, do you have any perspective on the Oceania region or any alliances in that region?
Yeah.
Well, one of our flagship programs is the Port Phillip Bay Keeper. So we're a voice, an independent voice for the health of our bay. And that's part of a global waterkeeper alliance. We have 350 grassroots organizations around the world on 6 continents. And so we're not in New Zealand, although there've been some discussions, I think, but we certainly are in Asia, South Asia and East Asia, and have talked a lot with the Indonesian waterkeepers there. The degree of issue can be more dramatic in different areas, but a lot of what we're dealing with at different scales is transboundary water issues, the quality of water, the quantity of water available, and the interactions of waterways with agriculture and energy production. So I think that's really shared across the region. The Asia Pacific economic region is a blue economy, there's tourism, there's fisheries, there's the cultural aspects that go along with those as well to protect. And Australia actually owns more water than land, believe it or not. So we really should be thinking about blue economy. And the rights of nature is a conversation that's coming up a little bit more shared in our Asia Pacific, Oceania conversations, whether it's Hawaii or California on that side of the Pacific, or with islands, New Zealand colleagues of ours, or South Asian partners in our Waterkeeper Alliance as well. So yeah, lots emerging, and I suppose resourcing it is usually the problem, the challenge. I haven't quite gotten to Peter's level of success with finding those commercial and investment markets, but I think we have to get there for our region to make it realistic.
Not-for-profits are fantastic. Not-for-profits have really supported the Climate Foundation get off the ground over the last 10 years. It's never an easy haul, even through, but you find names on their key sponsor groups, Bill and Melinda Gates, for example. So there is a way to tap in to the not-for-profit. Even in the Australian community, we're starting to dig up and the other way too also is family, quite a number of family groups who are the younger generations, are very sustainability and climate committed, community committed, and they can be, wealthy families can really assist through this. But there's a whole lot of rules, a whole lot of nuances to achieve it, but without the funding resource for all of what we're doing, it's hard to move forward.
Thank you.
So I loved hearing about the busking initiative with WPI students. I thought, fantastic, having fun and making dough. Why wouldn't you want to do it? And then doing good things with it.
Yeah.
Well, thank you all so much, Ross and Peter and April, for your perspectives. I'd love to hear more from you, but we're going to have to wrap it up. I'm also appreciating that, it'd be great to have a broader conversation that brings in the same topics that we had in the previous panel about Indigenous perspective on climate. There's a lot of important
Pretty cool.
here too.
Yeah.